Hello, everyone! Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. Today, I have the distinct honor of introducing to you Owen King in conversation with Tom Bissell. Hello, Owen. Hi, Tom.
Hey, good to be here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nick.
We, of course, are celebrating the release of Owen's latest book, The Curator. And not only should you get this because, one, Owen wrote it. Two, I hear it's a great book, but also cats. I was telling
Soup
Owen,
many cats.
I was telling Owen in the chat, like, it only was a few days ago that I was like, oh god, that's a cat on the cover. I just thought it was like a rift in time and space, and it was like something. But yes, Brooklyn Cats. Um, for those of you who haven't yet purchased the title, if you're watching this live, you're going to notice that there is a link below that'll take you to our website where you can purchase your own copy of Curator. Not only can you do pickup in store Mysterious Galaxy, but you can also have it shipped to you. We also do ship to most countries out of the United States. And while supplies last, Owen has been nice and provided these wonderful signed book plates, and they're all of them just about different with different cats and colors. That is awesome. I love it. And you even did your signature in different directions. That is a detail I love.
That's there's no end to my inventiveness.
Good. They'll keep them coming. Owen King is the author of The Curator, which we just showed off, double feature, and we're all in this together, a novella and stories. He is the co-author of Sleeping Beauties, an intro into alien invasion, and the co-editor of Who Can Save Us Now, brand new superheroes and other amazing short stories. Tom Bissell, the conversation partner for tonight, his short stories has won 2 Pushcart Prizes and has been published in multiple editions of the Best American series. He has also written 8 works of nonfiction, including Apostle and with Greg Sestero, the disaster artist. As I mentioned, you can purchase their books at the link below. That really supports not only these authors, but also us, so we continue doing wonderful events like this. And if you have any questions you would like to ask for the event, you're going to notice right now that there's a link below that says Ask a Question. Submit your questions there, and they'll be hopefully answered later in the event, depending on how much questions and time we have. All right, I'm going to go ahead and disappear for now. I'm going to leave it to Owen and Tom to take it away. I'll see you all at the end.
All right, thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. And I just want to say Nick's hat, White Trash
Yes.
Warlock, seems like a character type that could have been in this book.
For sure.
Thank you for writing this book, this excellent, absorbing, extremely cat-heavy book. It is a real
Yes.
feast of a novel. It's this wholly imagined world where Canada and Cuba seem to exist, but a lot of other things don't. There's revolution, there's ships, there's guns, there's ammunition, there's cats, magic cats, cat worship. So there's all these trappings of the modern world in this, but it's clearly like an adult fairy tale in a lot of ways. And it seems to exist in this post-industrial, vaguely medieval reality. So there's all these time periods colliding. And I kept writing in the margins like how dreamlike or even dream dredged the book feels. And I wanted to ask, like, my imagination was you woke up one morning having seen some fragment of the reality of this novel and just decided, wait, what is that world? And just started feeling your way through it. I would be curious to find out like how you came upon this dreamlike time and place.
Well, first of all, thanks to Mysterious Galaxy for having us. I just want to say, and Tom, thank you for doing this. It's good to see your face. I think that this is a little bit of a disappointing answer, but it does go to kind of the place you're talking about. When I wrote the short story that the novel's based on, it was kind of an open query, and I wasn't sure I could do it. It was for a sort of a collection of short stories that were novels that hadn't worked out, and I didn't have anything like that, but I wanted to be in the book, and they said I could try. So I was just writing sentences, and I had this sentence that's, I think, in the second or third chapter now that said something along the lines of, in the aftermath of the coup d'etat, decontrived to gain the curatorship of the National Museum of the Worker, and I didn't really know what it meant. And I thought about it, and I got really taken by the verb contrivance, and I thought to myself, well, why did she contrive to do that? And then I just started thinking it through, and I was like, oh, I know this museum that she went to, and I have a sense of the kind of character she is. And 15 minutes later, I was off and running, and then I started to incorporate a lot of different ideas that I'd had that were more free-floating, images and things like that. So it was a lot like what you're talking about, but I always tried to unify the narrative. And I mean, one of the things I always try to do is, and which I think is sort of essential to an entertaining story, is I always try to pay it all off. I try not to let anything just be. It all wants to work toward the end. It all wants to work towards the larger story. But I do like to spend some time getting there and sort of move around in the world and in that narrative line and spread out a little bit and give people a sense of the whole ambiance of the place and the world.
So if the germ was that sentence about she contrived to become the curator of the Museum of the Worker, what were some of the real world antecedents of the imaginary world you created? Like, I sensed that there was a lot of both recent and semi-ancient history sort of colliding to create this strange place. Like, some of it is pure Dungeons and Dragons. Some of it's Dungeons and Dragons. Some of it is like the Soviet or Maoist kind of governmental structure. So I'm just totally fascinated by the collision of so many different kinds of worlds that you put in here. I thought that was really the most beguiling part of the book.
Yeah, well, thank you. I tried to base the city where all the action takes place is unnamed, but it's a combination of Victorian London and 5 Points in New York, Vienna at the turn of the century, Paris at the turn of the century. Tried to pull from things that I'd researched. For instance, some of the things are real. The Mork ship is a major location in the book, and was a real thing in Lyon, France, where the bodies of criminals were put on display and studied on this Mork ship, and in real life it broke away and crashed, which is thoroughly disgusting. It was thoroughly disgusting just to start with, but of course in the book the Mork ship takes on magical conditions. It seems to be appearing and disappearing and flying through the air and things like that.
Well, that's why I brought up the Soviet thing, because the idea of a body being like sort of magically preserved is what every like communist regime would did when their
right,
when their bellwether died. So I was thinking of, go ahead.
And there were all kinds of things like that I tried to pull in, but it is intended to be a 19th century city in a country that we don't know, but in a world that's a lot like our world, but just a little bit different, right? Because it has two moons, and we can pin it down a little bit because we know places like Constantinople still exist. And so it seems to be there, but it's also kind of a dream of a place.
So dream dredged was the right verb for me to use there. So the Curator is not terribly like a lot of your other books, but it reminds me of a bunch of other books, some of which I don't know if you've read. Well, let's find out. One of the books it reminded me of was Mark Halperin's Winter's Tale, and another is William Goldman's The Princess Bride. So I'd be curious, have you read either one of those? And if not, what were some of the source texts? Because I assume Dickens was one too.
Well, I've certainly read The Princess Bride, and I remember reading it as a kid before I saw the movie. I just remember reading it with my parents, and which I think was sort of the way it was intended. right?
So can I ask you a question? There's
yeah.
Your general's called Gildersleeve, and the rival kingdom in Princess Bride is called Gilder. I was wondering if that was an incidental echo or an actual.
There's a possibility that it was unconscious, but I actually found that name on a gravestone locally.
Okay.
And one of the creepy things that I do is that I like to look at, especially like memorial plaques and like official buildings, and sort of scan for great names. And I like to wander around graveyards and look at the names and the stones. And I'd seen that name Gildersleeve, and I was just filed that one away and thought to myself, well, that's really going to come in handy for sure. But it's possible I made the connection. And certainly Dickens is a huge inspiration for the book, as are some other 19th century writers like Trollope and Elizabeth Gaskell, and I tried to catch a little bit of their mood and get it into the book. I don't really write like them, but I tried to stretch myself a little bit. I mean, no one really writes like that anymore, but I tried to stretch myself a little bit and catch some of what they were doing. And in particular, the book is definitely referencing Little Dora in a really conscious way, because Little Dora, she's domestic. She's the heroine. She's sort of striving to lift up her family in a certain kind of way. But it's only a very general kind of gesture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to ask you what your favorite Dickens novel was. He's a writer I've read alarmingly little of, but I sensed his imprint here. And so Little Dora, which I've never read, full disclosure. I have read Dombey and Sons, oddly enough, but that's a really obscure Dickens novel that I don't think is that widely read. I read it by accident.
Not read that one. My favorite is is Great Expectations, but as a sort of complete novel, and I think that's the one that's the most immediate, because it's like blast you right out of a cannon at the beginning, where the Magwitch, the escaped convict, meets Pip, in the fog. But I think that the other Dickens, I mean, there's a bunch of Dickens that I love, but in particular, I also love the first half of Little Dorrit, which is about her living in the debtor's prison with her family and going out to work every day to support her feckless family, and the incredibly weird woman that she works for, and all the mysterious people that she meets. And I just love that particular section of the book. The second half of the book's not quite as good, still really good, but I found that very, I'm sure that was a huge influence, both, I know it was consciously and probably subconsciously as well.
As a writer, I've done some world building in my time, but I've never even attempted it at the scale that you're doing here. And I was so impressed by the thoroughness and the depth with which you thought through your city, its denizens, the architecture, the government doings, especially because you said earlier it takes place in the semi-immediate aftermath of a coup d'etat. And it all feels really grounded and real to me in a way that books like this very rarely feel real. And when you're working on a narrative project of this imaginative scale, I wanted to ask you about, like, where do you start? Do you draw maps of the city? Do you create a flow chart of government agencies? Did you have to have the story of the coup in your head? I would be very curious to know how deep you dove into the processes, mechanics, and just the ornamentation of the world.
Well, I was really lucky in that I had written this short story that was a loose blueprint for the novel that I ended up with. But the short story all takes place in this museum that the main character, Dee, gains the curatorship of. She ends up in this little museum on this little obscure street in this unnamed city, and she takes over this museum that it doesn't appear that anybody has been to in a long time. And so I had a really good sense of the little street where, probably half the book takes place, and of the museum and all the things in that. and the way it was situated. And after I'd written the story, I thought to myself, well, I kind of know all this other stuff about this place, but I can't put it in. And a lot of the fun of the book was filling all that out. And I did take a lot of notes about people's titles and, the judge is a magistrate instead of a judge and things like that, and trying to mix up the terminologies, but always be, of course, consistent and use the same ones. And I had a sense of where the major locations were in east and west and the overall shape of the city. I'm not sure I ever, drew it or anything like that, but I kept really good notes, and then I would read through and think to myself, does that work? Positionally, does that make sense? And I would think to myself, is there another political position in between these two positions? And try to be clear and specific, but also, the book is pretty overstuffed as it is. And so I tried to also simplify wherever possible.
I wouldn't
also
say
a lot of
I would say stuffed.
Stuffed. It's a full meal, but I tried not to. One of the things about there's a lot of politics in the book, but it mostly takes place off stage, right? And you mostly hear the characters talking about the results of the political machinations and how they're not working so well, because most of the action, the revolution has stalled out and the revolutionaries have control of the city, but they can't seem to complete their mission and they can't figure out why. There's a bunch of strange things that seem to be rising up as obstacles and stopping them from finishing what they set out to do. And so I mostly focused on the characters reflecting on that. And so by making it secondhand, I was able to avoid some of the precision that would have been extremely difficult and very possibly tiresome, because nobody wants to read about, a long meeting most of the time, right? You got to be really good to pull it off, and have great speeches and things like that. So it can definitely be done, but that I don't know if that was something that I had in my back pocket here.
I think the secondhand nature of a lot of the reactions to the political doings of the world were what made it so convincing to me, because it felt very, that made it feel real. Whereas, as you say, dramatizing, the room where it happened, maybe it would be effective, but it wasn't as interesting to me. I liked all the people on the periphery, like, their partial and half knowledge of these huge events that you're constantly sort of cloaking in shadow going around the edges. I thought that was just really wonderful. You mentioned Dickens and some of the other like fiction books, but that helped you write this. But was there a nonfiction book that you found particularly?
So many. That I learned about the Mork ship. Yeah, from the Mork ship came from the nonfiction book "The Killer of Little Shepherds" by Douglas Starr, which is about it's a true story of a serial killer who roamed the French countryside, and how the effort to catch him helped inspire, the beginnings of forensic criminal science, criminal forensics. So that was very specifically helpful, because I borrowed his research to create this fantastical thing. And I read a bunch of books about Victorian London and about New York at the same time. I read one about Vienna. That was a big help. So I read a lot of books about how people lived in the mid and late 19th century, and tried to, and it's really important because especially how people live their day-to-day lives, because that's reflected in this museum that Dee takes over, which is called the National Museum of the Worker. And so all the wax figures in the museum are laboring at time specific tasks and jobs. And so that was really important. The books I read are kind of slipping my mind at the moment, but I read some really good ones. And and so that was endlessly fascinating and inspiring, because for me anyways, when I do research, it gives me new ideas. I try not to research so much for specific answers and more of the general feel of things, and then let it fire me up.
Yeah, you research for vibe, right?
For vibe, right?
That a lot.
Yeah.
I sensed this was a really fun book to write, but I also sensed it was an incredibly hard book to write. And my other sense was that this was the kind of book that an author could have gotten lost in at any number of points. And like, I'd be curious, if you found yourself getting lost, and if so, what was the beacon? Was it a character, a scene? Was it like, what was the thing that kept pulling you back to center, pulling you true north?
Well, I really like, the main character, Dee. She thinks of herself as Dee, but everybody calls her Dora, which is her given name, but she is Dee to herself. I love that particular character, and I loved writing about her because she's so consistently underestimated by all the people around her, and we as an audience know how much she knows and how much she's withholding, and we learn more and more about the things that she's withholding as we go along. So I always wanted to get back to her. We jump usually to somebody else and then back to her every other chapter, and so I always wanted to get back to her. And I also knew where I wanted to go at the end. I had an ending in mind, and I ended up changing it a lot. But I don't know if it's like this for you, Tom, when you write a story. But to do it, I have to have something I'm writing toward in a narrative sense. Like, it's like, okay, I think this is the way it's going to end. And probably 75% of the time, I end up changing the way it's going to end. But the whole time, I'm writing toward this destination that I have convinced myself is what it's going to be. And so I had an ending in mind, and I did change it a lot, pretty crucially changed it, but I was writing toward that the whole time. And that made it possible, but it was a really fun book to write, but it was hard at times. And I think that, my editor, Joe Monti, was extraordinarily helpful in reorganizing some of the chapters at the beginning of the book so that there's quite a bit of setup, but so that it still feels like you're moving along a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You're taking some tentative steps forward always. And you're not just squatting in a spot, which wouldn't be good. And I think Joe was really, really helpful with getting that little bit of movement and momentum in there that the book needed at the beginning. And but that was hard to do, that reorganization, because I had a lot of stuff that ended up later in the book that I had in the beginning of the book, and it was difficult to figure out how to move it.
I don't know if you'll find this interesting, but when I can't start writing a piece of fiction until I know the end, and 95% of the time I never get there, because I always realize the end I imagined, the end that I sort of come to naturally always supersedes the end that I've been imagining the whole time. And I always realize, oh, this ends way sooner than I thought it did. It's just a consistent thing that's happened throughout my whole life as a writer. I don't know why. I like trying to guess formative scenes in other people's books, just like I try to imagine like which scene in a movie got shot first or something. I don't have a very good batting average at this, but there's one scene in this book that I think it has some of your finest writing. It's the scene with General Gildersleeve coming back toward the city to an uncertain fate. General Gildersleeve is this elderly general who may or may not be insane.
Right.
And he's semi-disgraced. He's been fighting this shadowy, weird war. It's very 1984, like we've always been at war with East Asia. It's this shadowy that they're fighting, and he's coming back and semi-disgraced from this war. He doesn't know what's going to happen to him. And there's just this wonderful passage of him standing on the deck of a ship, sort of thinking about it all. And I think it has some of your best writing ever. I'm trying to find that page. Where is that? Let me see. I had it and I pulled my, here we go. General Gildersleeve aboard the lead transport ship. There's this wonderful, can I read a passage really quick?
Yeah, I'd love it.
He's talking about how his stomach feels like there's wasps in it. A clutch of wasps suddenly formed a fist and punched the inside of his stomach on the right side with a dozen stings. He dropped his mug clattering to the deck and threw himself forward from the camp chair. He hung over the railing and vomited cottage cheese down the side of the ship and into the ocean. As General M.W. Gildersleeve dangled his head, he considered the possibility that he had gone crazy. And then you do such a smart thing here. You just go to the physical world. Rust streaked the steel hull. The waves slapped against the ship and fell away. The blurry whitish shapes reappeared and pulsed with his heartbeat. His body felt puppet loose, everything hanging off his spine by humming piano wires. It even seemed likely that he had gone crazy. It's just such an effective, wonderful passage. I read that and I thought, oh, that had to have come early. That just had to have come when you were like full on, full steam ahead. The ship is steaming across the ocean. I'm curious.
It came pretty early, I think, because when you get to that, that's like at the top of the second part of the book. And when it came pretty early, because it's like that tells you, okay, it's something new is happening, and conflict that we didn't expect is on the horizon, and then that the other characters don't know about is on the horizon, because this guy is coming home and no one is ready for that. And he's totally off his nut, he's totally crazy. And so I had created the character before I got to, so I was thinking about him for a little while. Right. And I knew I had a really good idea that he was pretty nuts. And
elderly, insane military men are just wonderful archetypes, aren't they? They're just, you can do so much. They can turn out to be great
also
villains,
sort of
unexpected heroes. It's great.
Yeah, he is also sort of a sad figure, because his self-awareness extends just far enough to know that something is really wrong with him, but he has no choice but to continue, dragging thousands forward into battle. That's just what he does. So he is a little bit there's a certain pathos to him, but and I knew he was showing up, so I was thinking about that one for a while for sure. I had that down pretty early. You're right.
You have
it was formative.
Do you have like a paragraph or two? So I guessed correctly. Oh, I'm so happy. Yeah, I almost never do. So this is thrilling for me. Do you have a paragraph or two you'd like to read, just as you don't have to, because I think readings are, not always.
Let's see here. I got my book. I like the, one thing I wrote late was the, just the very opening, of the book. I don't know. It's a little bit long, but the bit here, the very first chapter, and I have these wonderful illustrations by Kathleen Jennings, and this mild spoiler alert, this picture at the very beginning of the book basically includes every single thing that's in the book, which is cool, Yeah, right great. down to the donkey on the stairs, if you can find it. But one of the things I wrote somewhat late was this opening passage, and it talks about the whole city. I can just read this one paragraph. In modern times, the city was distinguished by the line of handsome, heavy-browed monarchs who kept seat there, by its Congress and its courts, by the efficiency, fortitude, reach, profitability, and diversity of its mercenary army, which was said to include speakers of more than 20 languages, by its river, the Fair, which descended from the country's mountain region to split the metropolis in half, into east and west, and to drown its fresh waters in the ocean, by the peninsula's high bluffs, which diminished seaward and parallel to the Fair, by the bustle and trade of its port, by its 2 cantilevered bridges, by the modern convenience of its network of electric trams, by its vast urban parkland, the royal fields, and the royal pond therein, where boaters rode in vessels whose prows were carved into the likenesses of the nation's heavy-browed monarchs, from Macon the First to Zach the 21st, by the competition among its luxury hotels as to which establishment had the most luxurious cat as its mascot, by its cultural landmarks, such as the theaters and the museums and the morgue ship, by the 3 towering monolithic stones that dominated the plateau above the great highway a few miles beyond the city limits, and to which, by tradition, newlyweds from all over the world traveled with hammers and picks in order to chip tokens to signal their shared commitment, by the irony of its stinking gray waterway's name, by its factory fires, by its neighborhood fires, by its teeming lower district, the Lees, by the fecund poor who populated the Lees and gave their new generations to nourish its plagues and armies, by its vestiges of paganism, by its secret societies, by the tartness of the brine used to pickle its oysters, by the bands of industrious delinquents that crowded its streets, by the courage and strength of its men, by the wisdom and perseverance of its wisdom, and, like all cities, but maybe especially so, by its essential unmappability. And I think that chapter kind of prepares the reader for the, or I hope it prepares the reader, I don't want to flatter myself too much, for the idea that there is a lot, there are a lot of nooks and crannies and a lot of shadows, and you're going to have to go with this a little bit and sort of give yourself over to the ride of it and to the unmappability of it. And if you do, I think it's pretty fun. So that's what I was trying to do there.
Well, this sort of leads into my next. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to say,
and
also the descending, the list of things in the city gets weirder and weirder as it goes along, and that's supposed to be a reflection of the actual story as things get weirder and weirder as it goes along. And what starts out as, extremely grounded in, or I don't want to say extremely, but pretty grounded in this Victorian world, it gets progressively more untethered.
Are pickled oysters a thing? Because I love oysters. I don't know if I've ever had a pickled one. Do people pickle oysters?
I've never had one, but I'm sure I looked it up and it's real. I think you can pickle just about anything, Tom.
Well, you can, but should you? It would be the question.
Should you? Exactly.
One thing that clicked with me was this kind of cleansing, melancholic sadness that's at the core of the book. It's a funny book, and it's a really entertaining book, but there's just like a melancholy at the core of it that doesn't feel faked or affected, and I wonder if you, like me, the older you get, feels a kind of winteriness creeping into your imagination, and if so, do you fight it? Do you use it? Do you push against it? I've surrendered to mine, so I would be curious what your method is.
Well, I think that there is a. Things are finite in a way that they weren't when I published my first book back when I was 29, long time ago now. And I think that I looked at the world in a different way. And there's a mellowness that I feel that is different, and I think that mellowness probably does carry a certain amount of sadness, but I also think that it's probably more honest.
It's not
can't
piercing
exactly.
sadness. It's sort of
No, it's not a piercing.
sadness.
No, it's not a it's a mellow
Yeah.
sadness, you know. And I think that's I mean, there's something sad about the fact that the city in the book is essentially unmappable, because I'd love to map the whole dang thing, right? You know, and when you write a novel, at least when I write a novel, I want to wrap my arms around this huge thing, and you never can wrap your arms around the whole huge thing. You know, it's kind of like why every I mean, you work in film and television a lot. I always think that everything always is better before you write it, because it has no limit. It's not limited by ability. Like the very, very best writers, very, very best work is still not going to be as good as what you imagined it would be, and what they imagined it would be. And that's a screenwriter realization.
Go. A screenwriter mentor of mine said something to me. A screenwriter mentor of mine said something to me that I really laugh about. He said, "Never write a great script, because the final product will only disappoint. The goal is to write a really good script, and then if the movie's great, everyone's like, oh, it worked out so well. But if you write a great script, it has to be a great movie, or everyone is bummed out and pissed off." So your answers are just. Go ahead.
Oh, we're probably going to do questions soon. I just want to take a second to reflect the fact that Tom and I have been friends so long.
This is my next question.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead. I mean,
I was going to say,
we've
been
friends a million years. We've been friends, and
20 years.
It's wild to and moving to me that we still get to do this, and it's nice to have, you know, a friend that knows you and has known you as you've changed, and that you've known as they've changed. And yes, it's special, it's unique, and I'm so happy to be able to do this with you.
Well, I'm going to get verklempt, and I'm getting emotionally affected, so I'm going to move on. I'm going to just look at my question and read it so I don't get teary-eyed.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for 20 years. We met when we were barely out of our 30s. I remember the first night I met you. Do you remember where it was?
I want to say it was in New Jersey at a Fordham thing, wasn't it?
KGB bar in New York City. KGB bar in New York City.
Yeah, I did. And then did we meet at the New Jersey thing later? Yeah, it was some a story night, and I certainly wasn't reading, but maybe you were, and I think that's what it was. Yeah, KGB.
Yeah, we walked. We went to a bar, and me, you, and I think Kelly was there.
I think Kelly was there. Yep.
So, I think then when I was 29, 30, you were 29, 30, you just published your first book. I just published my book. I think about all the ambition we probably had back then. Mm-hmm. And now I'm, almost 50 years old, and I feel like waking up in the morning is about all the ambition I can handle or really need. Can you talk about what getting older has done to your storytelling, what it's done to your writing? Has it done anything to your writing? Do you feel any different?
I think I just talked to a friend of mine about this the other day, and I think that the one thing that's changed is it's a little bit more compartmentalized, and oddly enough, that's made me be able to do more work. I remember when I was 29, 30, I've told the story before, and the short version is that when I got my first box of books, I remember that for like 5 seconds I opened it and I was like, man, I completed myself. I've really done it. and then after 5 seconds I was like, uh-oh, I'm still me. And that was a rude awakening that I was still, hadn't ascended. And all the things about myself that were, a struggle were still there, and I was going to have to deal with them. But I feel like I'm able to put a little less weight on. I mean, of course, it's important to me that the things I write entertain somebody. I mean, me first of all, but hopefully some other people. I think I'm a little better at sort of keeping it in one box and my real life in another box. And I think that has hopefully made me a better writer. It's definitely made me a more productive writer because I'm a little freer, I think, than I was when I was younger, and I put so much of my self-worth into it. There's still self-worth in it, but it can't be the end and be all of it, of me. So I think that's changed a lot. What about for you?
I think having kids changed a lot for me. Like, if you'd asked me when I was 29, what do you want to do? And I'd be like, I want to be one of the 2 or 3 best writers of my generation. I don't give a shit now. Like, my goal is to get through life being a good dad and a good partner, so the people I leave behind when I die look back on me fondly, because I assume all my books are just going to, die and not survive. And that's fine, because the only difference between me and Hemingway and William Shakespeare is just the longevity. It's just a matter of duration. Like, we're all heading toward, we'll all be forgotten. We'll all hit oblivion. Some of us will just take a little longer.
Yeah, no, there is.
That sounds nihilistic, but to me, it's been a very freeing realization that take care of the people you love, and they'll take care of you. And the art part of it, anyone who gets to use their imagination has already won the existential lottery. And losing track of that and getting obsessed with prizes or sales or any of that stuff, you're pouring acid into a very delicate machine. And I know better than to do that now.
Yeah, and I also think that I know you, when you write, you're delighting yourself. When it's going good, I know you're like, yeah, I'm having a great time doing this thing. And that's another thing, is I have more fun than when I was young and I was writing. I definitely like it better now. And I think some of that is also just like practice. I mean, it took me many, many years to make it second nature. There was always like, up until my late 20s, for sure, I sometimes had to say, hey, sit down and work. And I never have to do that now. I just go. It's like fun always. So almost always. I wouldn't say always. A lot of the time.
Yeah, I wish I could. I wish I could say the same. You come famously from a family of writers, and we've talked about this a bit, about how having a father who's one of the 2 or 3 like most well-known writers in the English language raise you. And when setting out, having like your brother's a writer, your mother's a writer, like, was that
my wife's a writer?
Your wife is a writer. Was that a hindrance, or was that something you used as rocket fuel, or was that like, where did that come from when you're sitting down to write a book, knowing you have all these people who are going to have very firm opinions about what you're doing?
Well,
does it help? Be honest.
I think that the huge help is that, and there's many ways in which my life has been uniquely blessed. But one way in which I was extraordinarily lucky is that, to me, writing was a possible job. And not just because we had money and resources, but because my parents did it for their jobs, and that appeared to be a legitimate way to go about life. So that was really, really advantageous. But at the same time, I would say it was obvious that it was labor intensive to me as a child, because my parents would go into their offices and typewriter keys would clatter for hours on end. And, when you're a kid, or at least for me anyways, I was like, I like writing stories, but I don't know if I want to be alone all day.
That's what my daughter says. She doesn't want to be a writer.
Kind of a bummer.
My daughter says she doesn't want to be a writer because it seems really lonely.
Yeah, it seemed really lonely, and it took me a long time to commit to that aloneness and feel I don't know, to enjoy it and consistently, as I was just saying. it took me a long time to get to that. But I don't know. I don't feel a lot of, I don't like dread negative feedback from my family. I guess I'm unaccustomed to getting, hearing from them being like, boy, you really stung it up this time. So yeah, that's not one. Should we jump into the questions? I don't know how much time.
I was just disembodied voice of Nick. Totally, yes.
Yeah.
Is that Nick?
That was my.
Okay.
That was Nick. That was my last question, and I wanted to just thank you for answering all those so
absolutely
so intelligently. Okay, I'm just going to go first. Hi, I'm Stefania from Italy. I'm a big fan of King's family. You're unbelievably talented. You must be some kind of superhero. He's not. I would like to ask Mr. King, what does it mean to him, and what role does literature have today? Can literature make people's lives better? Thank you.
Well, literature, I think, has made my life better. So sure. I think that, novels, just speaking of novels, make us feel more alive. I mean, and it's, you recognize things and characters that are familiar to you, but you also come across things that are brand new and get you thinking. And it's also, I think a lot about why novels are different to me than television shows or serial podcasts or movies. And I think there is something particular about the way that they get you thinking about a story and how you own it in your mind as a reader. Everyone reads the same book, but no one sees it exactly the same way. And I think that specialness is hugely appealing and something that I wish for everybody to feel and enjoy. And so, and because it means a lot to me, makes me happy. Makes my days a little less empty.
I'm dubious of literature's ability to improve lives on a macro scale, but on an individual scale, absolutely. Here's a question from some asshole named Jerry Rocha.
Jerry! We love Jerry.
We love Jerry. Jerry's a dear friend. One of the most wonderful people. He says, I'm loving the Curator, and I was wondering, since you did this amazing world building, was it difficult for you to leave that world behind when the book was finished? Excellent question, Jerry.
I knew Jerry would ask a good question. He asked a really good one when we talked before. Was it difficult to leave the world behind? I mean, it's certainly a little daunting to think that now I've written this book and I rewrote it and I rewrote it and I rewrote it and edited it and looked at the proofs and right up to publication. Now I'm talking to Tom, and in the not too distant future, I have to start something new. I have a couple things, cooking, but it is a little bit hard to leave this place that I got to know really, really well and like a lot and feel like I understood and have to start over for sure. It's tough. Mm-hmm. But it's also exciting because now I get to make up something new. But there is a certain scariness about that. And I will say I would very much like to write another story about the world, but I probably won't do it unless I feel like, not to sound craven, but I would have to feel like there was a audience for it, and it would be about different characters in the same place, possibly intersecting with some people that we've met. I did have a pretty good idea for that. So you never know. I might come back.
Do you hear, audience? If it's commercially viable, he'll write a sequel. So smash that buying button.
I don't know if commercially viable. It's not so much commercially viable. I'd have to feel like a handful of people wanted it.
Fair. So it's just viable. Forget commercial. It's just
viable.
Viable. Yeah. And Jerry, thank you for the question. We adore you. This is from Brooklyn Ann. Hi, Owen, love your work. What do you do when you get stuck and or are uninspired?
Well, I have what I think is pretty singular writing method, which is when I get stuck, I quit and start something new. I am not one for
the kamikaze pilot method.
Yes. When I'm deep into a project, then I'll fight for it, But if I am if I've had an idea and I think it's a really good idea, and then I work on it for a week or two and it's not working for me, I always think to myself, well, if this is such a great idea, then it will still be here later and maybe I will actually be able to do it and I'll just move on to something else. And I like to have 4 or 5 things that I'm working on so that I can move around a little bit when things feel stagnant. That helps me, but that's not. I think that everybody's process is unique, and I will just say that I can find inspiration in a lot of different things. I can find it in the newspaper. I can find it on a walk, and I think the best advice I can offer is just try to be open to it and not thinking so much, I got to finish this thing or I got to write this thing, but just let yourself wonder a little bit about, oh, I wonder what the story is behind this thing. And, muse on it a little bit, and that might take you somewhere. That's probably the best advice I can offer.
We have another question here from Stefania. I assume I'm pronouncing that right because I have an Italian friend named Stefano, so I'm hoping Stefania is right. Can you usually enjoy other writers' books, or do you judge them from a writer's point of view? Like, do you find, I think asking, like, as you sort of get your ground beneath your feet a bit as a creator and as a writer, some of the joy of reading goes away because you're reading as a craftsman, right? And sometimes this magic spells a little bit, forms a little bit.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think that film is after you've seen film, people making film, sometimes you think a little more than you would like about, the coverage of the actors. Yeah. And you have a sense
whenever I see a shot, any film shot, I instantly am looking for the place where 20 people are huddled right off camera.
Yeah. Once you've seen it, you never quite can remove it unless you are into the totally into it, what you're watching. But I love to read. I'm always reading a book. I will say when I try to read away from whatever I'm writing. So, all the Victorian novels that I've read, I read before I wrote The Curator. I didn't read any. I read nonfiction, but I didn't try to read any. I didn't want to read any Trollope or whatever as I was writing this book because I didn't want that. I wanted the idea of those voices in my head, but I didn't actually want those voices in my head. But I'm hugely. I mean, I read Tom's writing, and I want to write like Tom. I can't write like Tom, but it gets me excited to get back to work because I'm like, look at what this guy's doing. No, it's true though. And yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've never written a novel. I've tried, but I've failed every novel I've ever written. So you've written several. So speaking of previous novels, a question from someone who doesn't seem to have a name here. On one of your Facebook posts or Instagram posts, you had a recommended song list for Double Feature, which is a book I love, by the way. Do you have one for The Curator? And if so, could you share it?
Yeah, I was just tinkering with something like that, and I will post that. It's interesting because the book is there's no jangling guitars in this world, and and I mostly listen to rock music. So the playlist will be very it'll be more ambient and reflective of the content as opposed to time period specific. But another, just think of like the sound of the book would be like the sound of the zither music and the Third Man or something like that. That's what
I'm just hearing Ren Fair, just Ren Fair stuff. That's very well put. So you said you're eyeing a next project. You've written in so many genres. This is going to be our last question before we go here. You've written literary fiction. You've written like comic fiction. This is like a clear fantasy novel. You read a horror-ish novel with your dad. Like, is there a genre that you're sort of warily eyeballing and thinking of drawing your gun on and taking a shot at?
Yeah, I'm super restless, probably to my detriment. I just don't like to do the same thing twice. So I'm working on a crime, a noir comic book with my friend Jesse Kellerman, and it's called Self-Help, and that's, I think, the first issue of that will come out later this year. And that's a totally different mood, set in LA and about grifters. And I'm very excited about that. And I have the idea I've been toying with is kind of is also kind of a crime novel with a slightly fantastic element to it. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now.
So noir and fantastical crime. That sounds very good.
But not like people doing space crimes. Understand?
Do you like writing for comics? Like that's the one thing you've never written for.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, the artist is kind of the director, right?
Yeah.
And I love our artist on the comic book, Mariana Ignazi, and it's very much like writing a film script, I think, in the sense that you write this thing, and then the artist is the actors, and she is the stage decoration, and she's the cinematographer, and her version of what we've written is always cooler than what we wrote. In the same way that when actors take on your lines, they make it so much, they don't necessarily do it the way that you originally imagined, but they bring their creative voice to it. I mean, one of the if anybody gets the chance to listen to it, the audiobook of The Curator is by Marin Ireland. And I don't know if you've had this experience, Tom, but usually when I listen to my own work, somebody reading it, I quickly get embarrassed. And in this case, I listened to a bunch of the book and I just kind of forgot that I wrote it because she's so amazing at doing it. And a few times, she would start to give a voice to a character. And I'd think to myself, oh, that's not how I thought of that person. And then I'd be like, oh, but this is much better. She's her inspiration and her take is always, makes me rethink what I wrote. And I'm like, wow, this is so smart. And she's so, ingenious at this. So that's a long way of saying, yeah, I love writing for comic books because I love seeing what the artist is gonna do, what they're gonna make of what we wrote, how that movie's gonna look.
Yeah. Spoken like a man who's spent 20 years sitting in a room by himself.
Exactly.
Nick, it is 6:59. Should we? There he is, the white trash warlock himself.
Yes.
Hey, can I just say thanks to everybody for coming? We saw all our friends in the audience, in the digital audience, and that was amazing. And we loved it.
Yes. Thank you so much. Owen, congratulations again. Thank you so much. Tom, thank you for being a part of this too. It really means a lot for you doing this with Mysterious Galaxy.
My absolute pleasure. Next time I'm in San Diego, I will spend dozens of dollars at your store when I come down.
Come find us.
Yeah.
And everyone
All
out there
right.
watching right now, don't forget, if you haven't yet gotten your copy, there is still time. We have book plates left, signed book plates with wonderful, wonderful cats. Many cats, in fact. Everyone loves them, including Tom. Tom especially. You can get your own copy of the Curator here. And we hope you all have a good night. We'll see you hopefully at our next event. Bye.
Thank you,
all.
everyone. Bye-bye.